Hi everyone, my name is Avideh Hagigi. I am an architect by training and a sustainability specialist by passion. So before I get started on today's topic, just so I get an idea of where you guys are coming from, are you all studying engineering? And if so, which disciplines? What do we have here? Civil? Yeah. Mostly civil? All civil. Okay, got it. Great. Okay, that's good to know. Okay, so today I want to talk with you all a little bit about a living future, which essentially is this concept of a regenerative future and what it means. And to do that, I'm going to walk you guys through some of the basics of the built environment and how it impacts climate change. Hopefully, am I the first speaker in this series?
You're the third one.
Third?
But
Okay.
The first one in this class.
Okay, so hopefully it's not a lot of repeat of what others have pointed out. But yeah. Okay, so as you all know, we've been experiencing some of the worst global warming yet. Just this past August, I don't know if you all heard about this, but equivalent of 12.5 billion tons of ice melted in Greenland in just one day. That's a huge catastrophic scale. And this is all to record warm temperatures in an area where it's typically really cold and icy. This amount of ice is equal to covering probably all of the state of Florida in about 5 inches of water. So we are entering a world of peak oil, peak water, peak phosphorus. We're in a world that is globally interconnected, but ecologically impoverished. We're in a world with 7 billion people and counting. We're in a world where every major ecological system is in decline. And in a world where, because of global temperature increases, we're experiencing things like more frequent rainfalls or uneven distribution of rainfall. We're experiencing things like wildfires here in LA. These are becoming regular annual occurrences. It didn't used to be like this. We didn't used to be threatened by wildfires every year starting October, but now that is a new normal, new reality that we're dealing with. So what do buildings have to do with this? So these are some global facts and figures, and you guys can look these up. Talking about global greenhouse gas emissions, these are gases that get released that are harmful to the atmosphere, and they get trapped within the atmosphere and increase global warming. So when we're looking at greenhouse gas emissions, that is the #1 cause of global warming. If you break it down further into the building industry and what the built environment contributes to these greenhouse gas emissions, here's a breakdown. So 11% of total greenhouse gas emissions is from the construction of building materials, the manufacturing of building materials. So the concrete that goes in the buildings, the bricks, the tiles, everything, the steel that you put in the structure of a building, all of that is hugely energy intensive and releases huge amounts of greenhouse gas emissions. 28% of global greenhouse gas emissions is generated by building operations. What does that mean? That's the energy it takes to heat and cool any structure. That is all your mechanical systems. That is what it takes to run all the buildings that are operating in our world today. And those systems release greenhouse gas emissions a lot of it is due to the refrigerants in there and whatnot. And then 40% of global waste is due to the construction industry. This is huge. This is 40% of global solid waste that ends up in a landfill. That is due to acts of construction that end up in the landfill. So again, there's an interconnectedness here between the greenhouse gases that are getting emitted, the amount of waste that is resulting from our construction practices today, and the compounding problems that result from that. So in short, I like to share this quote because I think we're entering a world where you can no longer be a civil engineer without understanding nature's hydrological patterns. You can no longer be an architect without understanding passive design and the impacts of toxic chemicals. You can no longer be a mechanical engineer without a deep understanding of energy systems. This is the new reality. This is the new baseline. So you can no longer be responsible for constructing the material world without understanding the impacts on the people and the environment. And you guys here as students today really need to grasp that concept and run with it, because this is going to be what your career is going to be about. So in order to explain this concept of regenerative built environment, I'm going to walk you guys through some basic concepts here. Some of you may have already seen this graph. How many have seen this? Okay, none. Brand new. Great. So let's see if I can get this pointer to work. I can get it to work. Okay. So on this graph, you'll see that there is a horizontal line here. All the way to the left is conventional practice. All the way to the right is regenerative living systems. And this horizontal line, anything below this line means that it's taking up energy, it's taking up resources, it has a negative impact on the environment. Anything above this horizontal line means that there's no negative impact to the environment. In fact, there's a positive impact to the systems, and it regenerates all the systems within it. So in the concept of buildings, you can go from conventional buildings all the way to regenerative buildings here. So what is green? Some of you guys may have heard of green design, sustainable design. Well, green design, you'll see conventional right down here. Green is right after it, is right within this sort of dashed line that I have here. That's green design. That is what we have been doing so far with LEED certified buildings, with sustainable buildings. Important to note that both conventional code design and green design still have a negative impact on the environment. It's just that green design has a little bit of a less impact on the environment. So the most commonly known example for green design is LEED certifications. If you guys haven't heard of this, I'm sure you're going to become very familiar with it. It's the leading sustainable design standard in the building industry. And LEED is really the best example of this idea of green, which is less bad. Now again, LEED was the very first sustainability standard, therefore it was focused on reductions. It was recognizing that yes, our current construction practices leave a negative impact on the environment. What is the first step that we can take? How can we just reduce some of this impact? So LEED is really focused on incremental reductions, less bad, this much less bad, this much less energy usage, this much less water usage. And it's a very prescriptive standard. It's, you have to reduce your indoor water usage by 40%, and there's a specific baseline that you have to compare to. There's sounds coming out of this. Let me just mute this guy. And it's based on design intent. So really teams show that the building was designed to meet this standard, but once the building is constructed, there's really no follow through to identify and make sure that the building's performing as intended. So then what is sustainable? Sustainable is the next level up here. You'll see between green and sustainable. So sustainable is really getting to this inflection point where you go from negative impact to positive impact. Sustainable is really balancing out the negative impacts of a building or a structure, but with the positive impacts that it may leave behind. It's sort of this zero-sum game that we're playing right now. You may have seen some of these certifications, you may have not, but There's a lot going on right now in the building industry with establishing targets to get to zero emissions, to sort of net out our negative impact with positive impact. There's zero carbon and zero energy certifications out there. There's a zero code that we're trying to get into the building code right now for California. The American Institute of Architects has adopted a 2030 challenge that's supposed to get us to this state of equilibrium of zero emissions. Again, this is all by 2030. It's not happening right now yet, although there are buildings that are achieving this right now already. So if you hear about net zero, this is what that is. Okay, so then we know what green is, we know what sustainable is, what is regenerative? So regenerative is really this upper part of the graph, and there's two levels to it. There's restorative and regenerative. I'm not going to get into too much detail here, but the basic concept is that regenerative really regenerates the systems around it, gives back more than it takes. If you take a certain amount of water, you give back even more water. If you take a certain amount of energy, you produce even more energy. So the whole idea is that it gives back. It's a net positive. Sometimes it's referred to as net positive impact. So is that really possible for buildings and the built environment, you may be wondering? It is possible. And the first step to sort of wrapping your head around this is to think about a project or a building in terms of a nested system. So your project is the first level of that system. And then think about the community or the neighborhood that the project is in. That's the second level of the system. And then think about the third level of the system, which could be the watershed or the state or the country. And then think about all the decisions that you make for that one project along the way and how it impacts those different scales of systems. Your decisions would be very different on a project if everybody was thinking about this, about the overall impacts within the nested system instead of just the project. And in that sense, it is very possible to give back and have a net positive impact. So, what if every active building resulted in greater biodiversity, increased soil health, a deeper understanding of climate, culture and place, a realignment of our food and transportation systems, a more profound sense of what it means to be a citizen of a planet where resources and opportunities are provided fairly and equitably. This is a tall order, but this is the vision of the Living Building Challenge. Incremental change is no longer an option. We've made, over the past 20 years, I would say, we've made great progress towards green buildings and sustainable buildings, but all of that progress is so minute compared to the scale of change that we need to happen right now. So the urgency is there. The big changes need to happen, and you guys are going to be the ones making these big changes. So get ready. Okay, anybody heard of the Living Building Challenge? No. So Living Building Challenge is a regenerative building standard. The idea, the whole premise is based on mimicking buildings after natural systems and how nature works. And this is not just for buildings. It could be anything in the built environment. It could be infrastructure. It could be renovations. It could be anything happening. Any active building, essentially. But this is primarily based on buildings, so I'm going to continue talking about buildings. So the Living Building Challenge is a philosophy and an advocacy tool for a regenerative built environment. And the idea is that a building should be modeled after a flower. The same way that a flower uses only the energy that it needs and it gives back more, uses only the water that it needs and it gives back more, and does not leave a footprint, a trace behind once it dies away. That is how our buildings should be designed and constructed. So is that possible? So is it possible to go from incremental reductions to aspirational challenges? Is it possible to go from prescriptive standards to a holistic framework and thinking? Is it possible to go from just design intent to actual performance? to measure how buildings and structures are performing to make sure that they are in alignment with our goals and our challenges. So the core framework of the Living Building Challenge is around these 7 categories or petals of a flower, going with the flower analogy, we love flowers. Place, water, energy, health and happiness, materials, equity, and beauty. Most of these categories, especially water and energy, are a part of a lot of sustainable design standards, including LEED. What is new here is an attention paid to equity, equitable practices, and beauty, structures that you enjoy being in and you love and you care for. And I'll go through each one of these one by one with a quick overview. So the place petal is about rejuvenating our sense of connection to place. So we're in Los Angeles here, and every structure that gets built here should be about reconnecting the people in that building to their sense of place, to what makes LA, LA. So it's really restoring the balance between human-made, man-made, and nature-made. And how can we work in cooperation? Some of this, in real world terms, it really translates into not building structures out where it's farmland, not removing farmland and destroying habitat to build new buildings. Or if that is absolutely the only option, then if you're taking away some form of habitat here, to restore it somewhere else. That's the whole net positive, zero-sum game that we're playing. And some of it also is about, you'll see human-powered living there. It's about being able to access a building by foot or by bike and not having to have a car. Not everyone has a car to get around. So how can we make sure there's equitable access to this building? A core principle of the Living Building Challenge is water and treating water as a precious, scarce resource. Right now, in our typical day-to-day conventional practice, there's no consideration for where the water is coming from, how many miles it has traveled, how much energy that water has taken to travel to that project site, and how it's getting used in the building, and then furthermore, how we're getting rid of it. Right now, it's all a very simplified system. I think it's overly simplified. It's actually a lot more complicated than we think it is. We think of, when we design buildings, we think of a source of water. We assume there's going to be water coming to the building, and then somehow we'll just get rid of it once we're done with the water. That's not how water works. Water in nature is a closed loop system. Every inch of water that falls on the landscape gets recycled and goes back up in the air. That is how nature works, and that is how buildings should be working. Energy. This is probably the most commonplace one that you guys may have heard about. With California right now has a plan to be all renewable energy, to have a fully renewable grid by, I forget what the targets are because there's so many different targets now, 2035, 2045, something like that. But the Living Building Challenge goes one step beyond that. They say, why can't every building generate its own energy so that it doesn't need to rely on the grid? Why can't every building, in fact, generate more energy than it needs and give back some to the community around it, or give it back to the grid? That is the concept behind net positive energy. Granted, this is, there's a slight flaw with this, and that is that in high density buildings that are high rises, think of downtown, you have a small footprint. You don't have a lot of space to put solar panels, for example. And you have a lot of people packed into that building. It becomes very impossible to be net zero energy, let alone net positive energy. So because of this, actually, the Living Building Challenge has been limited to low scale buildings. 2-3-story buildings. They're usually educational buildings that have some sort of philanthropic higher purpose, and they're able to achieve this because they have enough roof space. So our biggest challenge right now is to figure out how dense communities can be net positive energy. That is the biggest challenge. Okay, and then materials. You guys, as civil engineers, may not be dealing with this as much, but I am an architect and I deal with this every single day. You will be working with architects who will be dealing with this. So there is right now in our buildings, in the room that you're sitting in right now, I can tell you there's a ton of toxic chemicals. In these floors, there's a ton of toxic chemicals. In the walls and the paint, there may be toxic chemicals. Not to scare you guys, but these are chemicals that are not regulated at the federal level, right? But just because they're not regulated at the federal level in the United States does not mean it's not harmful. And so the concept behind the Living Building Challenge is that they have identified a list of toxic chemicals, which they call the red list. Any building that is to achieve the Living Building Challenge must not use any of these red list toxic chemicals in the building, anywhere, in the structure, on the interiors, anywhere, in the piping, everything. And it's because you may ask, well, why the piping? People don't come in contact with the piping, who cares? It's because whoever's manufacturing that piping, those tradespeople are getting the most exposure to these toxic chemicals. Again, think about the equity and think about the bigger impacts of the materials that you're using to construct the built environment and the people who come in contact with those materials all throughout its life cycle to get to your project site. There are people and communities affected by the manufacturing of these products that have chemical content in them. So it's not just for your projects, it's for everybody that it comes in contact with. And then another concept in here is net positive waste. It's about diverting all the waste in your building, not just having zero construction waste, which, by the way, is pretty impossible right now, especially with our recycling situation with China now. But also recycling human waste. I know you guys are just like, what's happening here? What is she talking about? So it is possible to compost human waste and use it as fertilizer. They have done this there's a couple of buildings I can point to that does this, but most importantly, there's going to be a building opening in the city of Santa Monica City Hall that will have this composting system for their entire bathrooms, and this is a municipal building that is making this happen. It's going to be huge. It's going to be the first big municipal building that does this at scale. So once that opens in about a year or so, you guys can all tour it and see for yourself. Okay, and then health and happiness. You might think, what does this have to do with sustainability? Who cares about health and happiness, you know? But it's important. We spend a lot of our time indoors. Something about 90% of our time is spent indoors. Think about your typical day. You get up, you come to a classroom, you sit here for hours. You go home, you're still inside. You may be out for a couple of hours on a given day, but you're spending most of your time indoors. You spend 6 hours, I don't know how much sleep you guys are getting, but I'm getting about 6 hours. 6 hours a night sleeping, you're indoors. You're doing all of this indoors. So it has a huge impact. Your indoor environment has a huge impact on your psychological well-being. You may not recognize it, but there's countless studies proving this. In terms of the amount of daylighting you're getting. What did I do here? I opened the blinds when I came in here because I cannot be in a room without daylighting. That is not acceptable. You guys should not be sitting in a room with no daylighting. Access to healthy indoor air. Everybody should have that. Access to fresh air should not be something that only if you can afford it, you can have it, right? It should not be a privilege. And a biophilic environment. Does anybody know what biophilia is? Okay, so biophilia is the innate sense of connection that humans have to nature, the innate wanting to be connected to nature. And I know some of you guys may be sitting here thinking, well, I don't really feel that. I'm okay being indoors. But there's innate biological connections, whether you recognize it and harvest it or not. as human beings, we're just wired to want to have a connection to nature. That doesn't mean you want to go camping every night. It just means that you want to be able to see birds and flowers and trees and the sky. Would you be able to go without seeing the sky for a week? I mean, it's pretty miserable, right? You'd be pretty miserable. So biophilic environment is about the sense that every building, every structure that gets designed should have views to the outdoors from every room. It doesn't matter if it's a custodial room, it should have views to the outside because everybody deserves views to the outside. And it should have good daylighting. So there's specific provisions for what qualifies as good daylighting, and there's a whole debate about that in the industry right now, but that is a basic concept. And then beauty. So one of the reasons I became an architect was because I noticed I liked certain spaces better than other spaces, and I couldn't really figure out why that was. And I realized that it's a combination of all the things that we've been talking about. And that a space that makes you feel good, that is beautiful, that delights you, makes you feel better automatically. You want to be in that space. If you had a choice between being in a room with no windows and another room with big windows or good air coming in or good views, which one would you choose? It's a no-brainer. It doesn't matter where you come from, who you are. That's what you would choose. So a lot of this is about what is human? What would you do as a basic human being? What would you want to, what kind of space would you want to be in? And then of course, is inspiration and education. A big part of the Living Building Challenge is providing inspirational, beautiful, high-performing, net positive waste, net positive water, net positive energy buildings that can then, anybody who comes into that building can see how it is running, how did they make this building happen, and what are some of the takeaways. Anybody can come in there and get a tour and see the building. That is one of the concepts, is that the building must be accessible and open to the public in some way. Okay, so that was an overview, really quick overview of the Living Building Challenge. I usually talk about the things I talk to you guys about. I usually take 3 hours to talk about it, so I'm kind of proud of myself right now for getting through it. So now you got all that context. Let that sink in. What I want you to imagine is, how does everything that I just talked about tie into LA? We're here in Los Angeles right now. What does that mean for LA? What does good look like in LA? How am I doing on time?
You have plenty of time.
Okay, great. So imagine a Los Angeles where every single act of design and construction resulted in greater biodiversity. How many of you have been by the LA River? You guys know what's going on with the LA River? There's huge revitalization plans. It's been under works for years. It's a 51-mile stretch of a river. It's a flood channel right now. So the river actually used to be an actual real river before there was a big flood, and then they decided to turn it into a flood channel, and they put concrete in it, and it just became a channel. It's no longer a river. It used to be a source of water for the native Indians here, actually. So I'm saying recent years, but this has been going on for 8, 10 years, I don't know. There's been some efforts in looking at the river again. Can it be a destination again? Can it be a sense of place again? It is a big part of the history of Los Angeles, and it's really shocking that there are people living here in Los Angeles that have never been to the river, don't even consider it a part of LA, don't even think about it. We used to have all sorts of native species, native fish in the river. The last native fish in the river was caught in, I want to say the 90s. I may be messing up the date, but that was the last native fish caught there. There's other fish in there now, but those are not native fish. Where did they come from? I have no idea. But They're surviving apparently in the channel better than they would than the native fish would. That tells you something. It tells you that we took away the habitat of those native species. We put in something that works for us. Great. It manages stormwater events. It manages the water. It drops it back to the ocean. Perfect. Doesn't impact our houses. Great. But we took away the habitat of a lot of these native species. Mieler architects, they're landscape architects. They're actually by the LA River. That's where their office is. They've been working on these revitalization plans with, there's a nonprofit group, the LA River something, I forget their name. Anyway, they're working together to come up with a revitalization plan of how do we undo some of this damage that we caused. And at the same time, how could the river become a destination again where you can actually go and enjoy yourself? Okay. Next one. Imagine Los Angeles with clear blue skies all the time. The picture I have in the background there is a typical view of downtown LA. Some days it's better than others, right? It's not always like that, I admit. But something you guys might not know is that the city of Los Angeles has not even for one day met the clean air standards of the national EPA. Not even for one day. And another thing that's further complicating this clean air issue is not that we have a lot of people and a lot of cars, although that's what started it, but right now those wildfires are actually resulting in worse air quality. You can go on the EPA's website and see a report of air quality. The American Lung Association every 3 years publishes a report on air quality. And they identify specific neighborhoods. They rate neighborhoods against each other for air quality. What is a neighborhood with the worst air quality in LA, you guys think? Where? That's pretty bad, yeah. Any other guesses? Right now, that's the worst. I'm sure that's going to show up in the next 3-year report. So the American Lung Association released a report. Their last 3-year report got released last year in 2018. Worst air quality in Los Angeles is actually in Chinatown. Why is that?
Middle of LA.
Exactly. Middle of LA, surrounded, it's kind of locked in between 3 major freeways, lots of cars passing by, lots of emissions there, and it's all just kind of getting trapped there in that triangle. So that's the worst air quality. Is it fair that people who live in Chinatown should experience worse air quality than those who are living in like Santa Monica? I don't think so. So why is that okay? So of course, going towards electrification as California is going towards more electric cars will relieve some of this, right? I don't really know what the net impact is going to be, but I'm hoping we're going to end up with better air quality than we have right now and that we have had. Okay. Anybody surf here? You guys are in East LA, I guess nobody surfs here. I don't either, it's okay. I hear from my surfer friends that they can't go surfing 72 hours after any rain. And I thought, well, that's weird, why is that? So then I looked into it a little bit. And I realized it's because whenever it rains, the way our current city is designed, our stormwater infrastructure for you all civil engineers, and I'm probably oversimplifying this because I'm an architect, you know. But basically, rainfall falls, and it goes into storm drains out to the ocean, straight out. That's where it goes. So if you think of all the rainwater that gets washed down in the streets with all the trash and all the chemicals in the streets and all the, I don't know, oil that may have been dripping from cars, whatever else, all gets washed down, goes down into the storm sewer, goes out to the ocean. It's not good. That's not good. So you can't go surfing. There's a 72-hour advisory because surfers actually get sick by just being in the water. We're not talking about drinking that water. We're talking about being in the water. So that's not right. It shouldn't be like that. And there's a couple of ways of solving that. City of LA, actually County of LA has a One Water LA plan now that they're working on. It is the first municipal watershed plan that's looking at bigger LA watersheds instead of dividing it up into these small areas. Because anyway, I can get into this. There's a whole politics behind how water is getting distributed and managed in Los Angeles, and it ties into equity. It ties into access to this clean water. So, you know, Santa Monica people don't have it so easy. I guess they get some crappy water after the rain. So, okay. Imagine a Los Angeles without a single homeless person. There's been a lot of talk about this lately. The mayor has signed big bills that direct funding towards affordable housing. We'll see how all that works. Hopefully it's got to be better than where we're at right now, right? But I work in downtown LA. That's where my office is at. And I probably walk past at least 10 or 20 homeless people on a daily basis. And this is the nice part of downtown. I'm not walking through Skid Row, guys. I'm walking through normal downtown LA. It's a pretty high number, and it's pretty heartbreaking every time I have to pass by these people. But you know, if we were to really design for equity, we would include an affordable housing option in every development, and we would make space for these people. Right now, the way our spaces are designed, especially landscaping. I got a whole bunch to tell you about that. Anyway. Landscaping right now is designed to prevent homeless people from loitering. There's specific design strategies that are used. We also designed to prevent people from skateboarding on benches and stuff. You guys probably have seen that. So unfortunately, we've got all these design strategies built in that's supposed to prevent people from engaging with a building or a structure because we're so tied up in this sense of security and this is my lot and this is my building and you should not be here. That needs to change. That NIMBYism needs to change. Okay. And imagine in Los Angeles where everyone has access to healthy, affordable, locally grown food. There's this concept of food deserts. I don't know if you guys have heard of this. It's basically areas in any city, not just in Los Angeles. Every city has these areas, unfortunately, where there's no access to healthy food. These commonly tend to be low-income neighborhoods. These are neighborhoods that don't Whole Foods is not going to go and open shop in Compton. They're not going to go into certain neighborhoods, and that's unfortunate. That's a class issue. As a result, especially the children who grew up in these neighborhoods don't grow up with healthy food, and so they develop bad eating habits. You know what happens when you develop bad eating habits? Obesity and a range of other problems. So this is fundamental. Everybody should have access to this. And then imagine a system where our local food production, processing, and distribution systems clean water, they renew the soil, they recycle nutrients, and they work in harmony with nature's principles. So this is a big one. California, you guys may know, produces a whole lot of crops, but it's mostly in the Central Valley. And a lot of it we produce enough to feed a lot, I forget what the percentage is, but to feed a good percentage of the United States. Yet we don't have enough food to feed our people here in California, which is kind of interesting. At the same time, because everything is grown in a specific region of California, think about the Central Valley and then think about how far that food has to come, to travel, to get to you here. It's traveling a long distance. That's greenhouse gas emissions. That's contributing to global warming. Not to mention that the practices we're currently using for farming, again, I'm not a farming expert, but you guys can look this up more if you want to. But the systems we're using right now for farming are not regenerative. It means that these systems right now, these practices, damage soil. Once you damage soil, you can no longer use it to grow crops. concepts of regenerative farming is that you enhance the soil with every time you plant something, you're enhancing the soil so that it has more nutrients even the next time around. That's how this works. Think of a net positive impact. Think of how you can compound positive things instead of getting stuck in this game of reductions and reductions. And I'm going to reduce a little bit here and do a little bit less bad there. Okay, and this is the last one. Imagine in Los Angeles where all buildings are designed to clean the air and water around them and operate without reliance on fossil fuels. Is it possible for a building to clean the air and water around it? What do you guys think? Yes, it is. It absolutely is. It's not the normal. If you're doing conventional practice, that's absolutely not what you're doing. But if you're practicing regenerative design, that is exactly what you're doing. So it is possible for a building to clean air around it. There's a whole slew of facade systems that can do that. They just happen to be expensive right now, not widely accepted, from my experience. But there are ways of achieving this. Oops, sorry, did I not advance this slide? There we go. There are ways of achieving this. And it's definitely possible for a building to not be reliant on fossil fuels. You guys know this, net zero energy, net positive energy, harvest your own energy, install a battery backup system so that when you don't have the sun out and shining, you can store your energy in that battery and use it at nighttime. It's really simple, guys. We can get there. Okay. So thank you for hearing me speak. I encourage you all to think about other scenarios. What would your living future in Los Angeles look like? What is that one thing that's impacting you daily that you wonder, well, why is it like that? I represent the Living Future LA Collaborative. That's sort of my side job, I guess. But you can tweet at us. We've got a website. You can definitely join the collaborative if you'd like to connect with like-minded professionals. We also have some students in our collaborative. It's sort of a voluntary thing. But really, I encourage you, if there's one takeaway, just think about what that will look like for you and make that happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was pretty interesting. A lot of great topics. I'm going to start with a couple questions and then we can see if anyone else has some questions. You mentioned transportation in one of your slides. Can you, because this is the highway engineering class, and the most related to transportation. So can you please elaborate on that a little bit in terms of sustainability initiatives or how transportation infrastructure can be connected to sustainable structures?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of ways it can be connected. The number one biggest impact, obviously, is the use of what type of fuel transportation systems are running on and the amount of greenhouse gas emissions that are emitted as a result. But also a lot of it is thinking about, it's not just about building new highways, right? That is not going to solve LA's transportation problem for sure. It is about understanding, you guys are really talking about moving people. How do people move around the city? And how do you make that a pleasant journey? How do you get people to want to walk around the city? This is a challenge that we deal with as architects in our buildings. How do we get people to take the stairs instead of the elevator? You're dealing with it on a much bigger scale. So beyond just basic GHG metrics and the amount of water, by the way, that all that concrete is going to use up in construction, and the amount of greenhouse gases that are going to get emitted every time you construct a new subway tunnel, hugely energy intensive, is to think about the human factor of it. You're not just dealing with cars and transportation systems. These are people moving around. And what would their ideal be? How would they want to be getting around? I think that's one factor of it. It also ties into our water systems. I mean, there's, I don't know how far I should go into this, but I'm going to leave it at that. There's a lot of ways it connects. I would encourage you guys to think about it holistically.
Very good, thank you. I have a couple more questions, but let's see if anyone here has any questions.
Anything?
I guess it's kind of like a general question, but like, what do you think is like the main reason that's preventing, major cities from going into like that? Because I've been hearing like sustainability for some time, and it's like a word that's always thrown around, but not really understood. Like, what's like, I guess, like politics, or just people not wanting to put that money in and invest in that, or it just seems like we're just talk about it, or never really do anything about it. So.
Well, we are. I would challenge your perception that we're not. I think we are, especially in California, especially in LA. We're kind of in a bubble. We have a governor who's signing bills and signing us up for commitments. We've got a mayor who's wanting to go even farther than that. Our mayor Garcetti just released LA's Green New Deal. I don't know if you guys saw that. LA's Green New Deal really touches all of the things that I talked about today. It's really an amazing, holistic plan to make things happen. And in line with that, interestingly enough, when they came out with the LA Green New Deal, they also released a plan, sustainability plan for the county of LA, because the LA Green New Deal is mostly for city of LA. And that county sustainability plan is very much in line with the LA city plan, with similar targets for, and these are not reduction targets. These are not, we're just going to reduce our water usage. These are, we're going to promote biodiversity. We're going to regenerate some of these things that we took away. We're going to take some positive steps. And it's all in the framework of equity and social justice. There's a big, huge equity and social justice factor in these plans. The mayor has released sustainability plans before. I think every 3 or 5 years they release an updated sustainability plan. But up until now, it hadn't been fully holistic. This is the first one that I have seen that is fully holistic. So that's a signal of a change in thinking, especially in politics and at the government level. There's a change in thinking already. I would say what's holding us back is not that people don't want to do it. If you ask anybody if they want to provide cleaner air or cleaner water, they would say yes, absolutely. Nobody wants to create miserable spaces or increase greenhouse gas emissions. Nobody would want to do that. It's that our systems currently, the way, and you guys will become more familiar with this once you go out into practice, the way we're practicing today in the built environment, the way different consultants are interacting with each other, the way projects get procured, are just so incredibly flawed. I mean, the whole system is so siloed out that it's impossible to identify synergies and think holistically. It's all set up so that you'll be the civil engineer and you'll just be responsible for your part of the work. And sometimes there's very little overlap between all the different components of the project. So that's sort of on a smaller level with what you guys will be experiencing, is that everything is really siloed right now. And we need everybody to be able to take that step of thinking beyond just what they're assigned and what their little piece of that puzzle is, and see that bigger picture. The projects that have been able to do that have seen great results. Most projects today are not doing that. But that's one factor. But of course, politics is always a factor too. Another thing I'm seeing is that there's I'm seeing a lot of architects, but also a lot of engineers going into politics now, becoming more politically active, because you guys are going to be constructing huge, incredible systems. You better have a say in what policies get enacted and how that's going to affect you. Don't be in that reactive position. We've been in a reactive position for a long time, but I think you all have the opportunity to be more politically involved and engaged and actually advocate for policies that you think will benefit not just your profession, but the bigger picture, right? So that's all. There's a lot of changes happening right now. I think we're on the right path. The part that I don't like is that it takes time. So.
Any other questions?
Is there anything being done right now, like in LA, to try to impact or change like the agricultural practices in the Central Valley, to lean more towards a sustainable farming, that type of thing?
There's been a whole lot of education happening from what I know, and I have limited involvement in this, but there's a lot of education happening in terms of what is regenerative farming even. A lot of people are not familiar with it. A lot of farmers are not familiar with it. So I would encourage you to look into this. I just talked to you guys about the Living Building Challenge. There's also a Living Food Challenge. Look that up. It's a new program, but it's meant to get the food industry towards that regenerative practice. I don't know, unfortunately, if there's anything specific being done right now to get the Central Valley to regenerative practice. I just know there's been a lot of talk about it, and there's a certain level of education happening. There's also a lot of water issues up there in terms of where the water goes. So that's a whole other political thing. But yeah.
I have another question. You mentioned about the air quality around the city and downtown. A few months ago, I was looking into a small project, and we found this website that's called howloud.com, and you can find out if your neighborhood is generating a lot of noise. Of course, around the highways, you have a red area that shows that this is the high noise or high sound around the airport. Do you know of any resources to find out what are the not healthiest locations around the city in terms of air quality? Is there a map, a visualized database of air quality for the city of LA?
There is, and I'm forgetting the name of the website. There is a website that has a map of LA with the air quality ratings. I can share that. I can pull it up and share that with the class. I don't remember off the top of my head. The American Lung Association report has the list of cities that sort of ranked it. So that's one resource. But in terms of an interactive map, there is another one that I found. I can share that. I mean, and that's a big factor. If you're incorporating biophilia in your structures, in your design, those plants help clean the air too. It's not just for fun, you know. There's actual health impacts to that. Yeah.
I have a question. So you mentioned about there's a regenerative building by in Santa Monica, and how much did that cost, or how much the government spending in that building? And then if they use conventional approach to the building, and then so what is the cost for that? If you use two different methods, and then in the end of the day, if all the buildings is going to be greener or maybe more sustainable, so well, as a consumer, would that increase the price when thinking of like purchasing houses or like residential place?
Repeat that last part.
So I'm just wondering, you were mentioning all those buildings want to achieve those goals, right? Like living buildings.
Yeah.
And then how much does that cost to achieve those? And then
I got that.
using those red materials.
Right.
And then in the end of the day, we are the person that we have to kind of rent that place or maybe buy the plot. So how much does it cost?
So for that building, the cost was higher than a typical per square foot cost. Part of that is because that is the first building in Southern California that's taking up this humongous challenge. And so I would say, actually, let's break it down. There's always soft costs and there's hard costs. The hard cost, which is the construction materials that go into the building, is the same cost. Those materials did not cost any more than conventional materials. But there's a huge soft cost to it. The soft cost is all the people and hours that they're spending in digging up this information and trying to get things through the State Water Resources Board, because they don't allow you to actually reuse your water, which is really weird. Trying to get through those regulatory barriers, all the hours you spend on that gets counted into the soft cost. So the soft cost for that project was big, it's huge because of that. But the hard cost, when it comes down to the actual construction cost, is the same. There are actually developers. There's a building, multifamily, it's a rental building apartment complex in downtown. And the developer decided to identify 10 units out of the 50 or so units as their sustainable green units. What does that mean? They used better materials on the inside, healthier materials. And each of those units is actually connected to a solar panel up on the rooftop. So each unit is net zero energy on its own. That's all the energy you're using. And they piloted that, which is really interesting. They chose to pilot that in Los Angeles, which means there's a demand for it, because they're going to be renting those units at a higher price. And they're going to be recovering any sort of extra money that they put into those units, they'll be recovering through the higher rents. Now, is that the right way to go about it? In the long run, I don't think so. Again, there's a social equity problem with that, is that it seems to be that the green units are only for those who can afford it then. But that is a trend of the market, and it will eventually get to a point where it can be an option for anybody. That's the point we need to get to. I don't know how well they're doing with those units, but I'm curious now.
Any other questions?
You mentioned the distributed water a little bit. We have time. Can you elaborate on that?
The distribution of water.
Well, to all the political, all the political things that are going on with that, relative to.
Oh yeah. So the way, if you think of County of LA, we've drawn lines around these neighborhoods. We've identified these neighborhoods. These are for governmental purposes, for political purposes. This is how they count the consensus, the 10-year census of how many people, what's the demographic, yada, yada, yada. It all gets broken down by these neighborhoods, right? The problem is that the way we handle our water also gets broken down by these neighborhoods. So if you look at, if you take away the neighborhoods before we were all here, if you think about pre-development Los Angeles, there are, 2 or 3 major watersheds, and a watershed is an area where the water all sort of drains in the same direction and it ends up in the same spot. These form naturally, right? Based on the topography, based on the landscape, these form naturally. These are watersheds. Let's say we have 3 watersheds. We've got 20 neighborhoods that are divided up in each of these watersheds. And the water gets, the way the water then is handled is per neighborhood, unfortunately. So each neighborhood is only concerned about handling their own water, and they're not thinking about the fact that they're part of a bigger water shed system. And all that water needs to be treated as one water in that watershed basin. So that is part of the problem. And the way transportation ties into that, because with transportation, you are traveling potentially long distances. You're connecting different stations in different parts. But sometimes you have the same water management system for these transportation systems. So it needs to be in response to the watershed. That's really the challenge that we have. Does that kind of?
Yeah.
All right, if there's no more questions, thank you again.